So Elon Musk just did what Washington said was impossible. While the White House watches the North American trade relationship fracture in real time, while Ford and GM sit in emergency board sessions, while the auto industry absorbs the most catastrophic structural shock in a generation, Tesla's CEO just signed a bilateral partnership agreement with Ottawa that positions Tesla not as a casualty of the trade war, but as its single biggest beneficiary. The deal was announced without warning. It was announced without fanfare. And when the details became clear, the reaction from Detroit wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was recognition. Because what Musk just did, what Canada just gave him, and what it means for every other automaker, still scrambling to replace the integration framework that Ottawa severed, is a competitive realignment. So decisive that analysts are already calling it the single most consequential corporate action of the entire trade war. Subscribe now. Because while the rest of the American auto industry is bleeding, Tesla just changed sides. Here is exactly what was signed. Because the precision of this deal is inseparable from its devastation. Tesla and the Canadian federal government announced a comprehensive strategic manufacturing and resource partnership, a framework that gives Tesla preferential access to Canadian lithium, nickel, and cobalt at government-negotiated long-term rates. It gives Tesla manufacturing integration rights at the new Volkswagen Gigafactory corridor in Ontario, access to Canada's CEDA and CPTPP trade frameworks for tariff-free export of Tesla vehicles into European and Asian markets, and a joint investment vehicle worth $18 billion Canadian in next-generation battery and autonomous vehicle infrastructure on Canadian soil. Prime Minister Carney's statement was exact, deliberate, and it was aimed directly at Washington. Tesla came to the table as a partner, not with demands, not with threats, not with conditions designed to extract sovereignty concessions. As a partner, Canada's industrial strategy has always been to build with companies in countries that treat cooperation as a foundation, not a leverage point. Tesla understood that. The agreement reflects it. Carney didn't frame this as a betrayal of America. He framed it as a natural consequence. The partnership framework exists because Tesla chose partnership. The door was always open. Washington chose not to walk through it. Tesla walked through. The White House reaction was immediate, and it was the wrong reaction. An administration spokesperson called the deal a circumvention of American trade policy and suggested it would trigger a review of federal EV subsidies and government contracts tied to Tesla. The threat landed flat, because the numbers make the threat hollow. Tesla's Canadian deal gives it access to battery minerals at 30 to 40% below the spot market rates that American competitors now face after the resource framework collapsed. It gives Tesla tariff-free access to 450 million European consumers through CEDA and 500 million Asia-Pacific consumers through CPTPP. It gives Tesla Canadian manufacturing capacity at a moment when Canadian capacity is the most strategically valuable industrial real estate on the continent, because it sits inside the trade frameworks that America just lost access to. The federal government can threaten to review EV subsidies, but it cannot give Ford, GM, and Stellantis what Tesla just obtained. It cannot give them the minerals, it cannot give them the market access, it cannot give them the manufacturing corridor. The threat is noise. The deal is structure, and structure beats noise. Every time. So what did Musk actually see that Detroit missed? Because the answer reveals not just a business decision, but a strategic intelligence gap between a founder-led company that moves on analysis and a legacy industry that moves on assumption. Musk watched the same trade war unfold that every CEO in the auto sector watched. He saw the same Canadian actions, the VW Gigafactory announcement, the $25 billion transition fund, the European and Asian partnerships, the CEDA automotive provisions, the CPTPP framework. Every piece of what Canada was building was public. Every data point was available. Every signal was visible to anyone paying attention. What Musk did differently is what Canada did differently in relation to Washington. He didn't assume the pattern away. He followed it to its conclusion. The conclusion was simple. Canada is building the future of North American automotive manufacturing outside the American trade framework. The companies that partner with Canada now get in at the foundation. The companies that wait get in later, at higher cost, under worse terms, if they get in at all. The minerals deal alone is worth the entire partnership. Lithium, nickel, and cobalt are not commodities. They are the rate-limiting inputs of the electric vehicle transition. Every major EV manufacturer on Earth is in a structural competition for long-term supply contracts at predictable prices. Tesla just locked in Canadian supply, the world's second-largest nickel reserve, and a top 5 lithium producer, at negotiated government rates for 25 years. Ford doesn't have that contract. GM doesn't have that contract. Rivian doesn't have that contract. Every competitor that has to source battery minerals at spot market rates, in a market that is already supply-constrained and getting tighter, is now competing at a structural cost disadvantage against Tesla in every EV segment, every market, every price point, for the next quarter century. That's not a business deal. That's a generational competitive moat, dug in 72 hours while Detroit was still in emergency sessions, absorbing the cost of losing the auto integration framework. The market access dimension is where the devastation compounds. European and Asian automakers have spent years lobbying their governments for reciprocal access to North American markets. Canada's CEDA and CPTPP frameworks already provide it in reverse, giving Canadian-manufactured vehicles preferential access to European and Asia-Pacific markets. Tesla's Canadian manufacturing partnership puts Tesla vehicles inside that framework. A Tesla assembled at a Canadian facility, using Canadian battery materials, under the strategic partnership, qualifies for CEDA and CPTP preferential treatment. That means Tesla can sell into the European market, 450 million consumers, at tariff rates its American-manufactured competitors cannot match. It means Tesla can sell into Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the broader Asia-Pacific market under preferential terms that American trade policy just made unavailable to every other domestic manufacturer. The trade war that Washington started to protect American manufacturers just handed Tesla a tariff advantage over every American manufacturer in every market outside the United States. The policy meant to build walls just gave the company that went around the walls a fortress. Now let's talk about what Detroit is actually facing, because understanding the asymmetry between Tesla's position and the legacy automaker's position is understanding why the next decade of the auto industry just got rewritten this week. Ford, GM, and Stellantis are absorbing the tariff compounding from the severed auto integration, an average of $3,000 to $8,000 in added costs per vehicle depending on supply chain complexity. They are simultaneously redesigning supply chains that took decades and tens of billions to build. They are competing for mineral supply contracts in a market where Tesla just locked in the best available terms. They are locked out of the trade frameworks that now give Canadian-manufactured vehicles preferential access to European and Asian consumers. And they are doing all of this while their core markets, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, face the economic contraction that comes when the anchor industry absorbs a structural earthquake. Tesla is absorbing none of those costs. Tesla's Canadian supply chains sit outside the tariff compounding because the strategic partnership grants Tesla the integration provisions that the broader bilateral framework just lost. Tesla's mineral costs are fixed for 25 years at negotiated rates. Tesla's European and Asian market access is protected by trade agreements that have legal and institutional momentum independent of whatever Washington does next. Tesla's Canadian manufacturing capacity is capitalized by $18 billion in joint investment that doesn't get undone because an administration changes its mind. Ford woke up this week facing billions in restructuring costs and years of supply chain uncertainty. Tesla woke up this week with the most advantageous manufacturing and resource position in the North American auto industry. That gap doesn't close in a quarter. It might not close in a decade. And Warren Buffett, who said 2 words about Canada's auto severance that echoed through every boardroom on Earth, said 3 words about the Tesla deal. He said Musk read Canada. What Buffett means is not simply that Musk made a smart deal. What Buffett means is that Musk understood something structural about how Canada operates, the same thing that Washington catastrophically failed to understand, and he positioned accordingly before the window closed. Canada follows a pattern: build the alternative, reduce the dependency, act from strength. The pattern repeated across energy, minerals, finance, alliances, and automotive integration. It was visible every time. Most of Washington never connected the data points into the pattern. Musk did, Berkshire did, and the firms and executives who followed the analysis to its conclusion, rather than filtering it through the assumption that Canada would never do it, are now positioned on the right side of the most significant industrial realignment in North American manufacturing history. The money saw it. The money always does. Not because the money is smarter than the government, because the money pays attention to what's actually happening, instead of what it wishes were happening. The political dimension is where this becomes a crisis that extends beyond the auto industry. Tesla is an American company. Its CEO is one of the most prominent political figures in the current administration's orbit. The fact that the most visible American entrepreneur of this era just signed a partnership deal with Canada that positions Tesla as a beneficiary of the trade war rather than a victim of it, at the precise moment when the trade war's costs are landing hardest on the American workers in the states that decided the last election, is not a business story. It's a political earthquake. Michigan auto workers are absorbing $3,000 to $8,000 in added costs per vehicle they build. Their plants are at risk. Their suppliers are freezing investment. Their communities are beginning the contraction that follows industrial disruption. And the most famous businessmen in their president's orbit just cut a deal that moves manufacturing investment, mineral supply, and market access to Canada, not to Ohio, not to Michigan, to Canada. The UAW's statement was surgical. American workers are being asked to absorb the costs of a trade war, while American capital finds every exit available. That's not irony. That is the explicit, documented, visible consequence of the policy. And Michigan, which decides American elections, just watched it happen in real time. Can this be reversed? Theoretically, yes. If the administration restores a bilateral automotive integration framework, negotiates a comprehensive trade deal that gives American manufacturers the market access in mineral terms it just gave Tesla by default, and rebuilds the trust that 8 months of tariffs, threats, and destroyed deals have systematically eliminated, then the structural disadvantage that Detroit now faces relative to Tesla narrows. But ask the $730 billion framework whether Washington can complete a trade agreement with Canada. Ask the $917 billion deal. Ask every destroyed opportunity and every abandoned negotiation whether the institutional will exists to do what would be required. And then look at the clock. The Tesla deal is signed. The $18 billion in joint investment is committed. The 25-year mineral contracts are in effect. The CEDA and CPTPP access is legally protected. Every day those structures solidify. The window for reversal narrows. The VW Gigafactory is not being unbuilt. The European partnerships are not being unwound. The Canadian manufacturing corridor is not being abandoned. Each day the alternative becomes more permanent. And each day the cost of not having been part of building it from the beginning grows larger. This is how structural shifts work. They don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, data point by data point, deal by deal, until the moment when the accumulation becomes undeniable and the window for a different outcome has already closed. That window just closed for Detroit. It closed when Tesla walked through the door that Washington left open for 8 months and never walked through itself. One deal, one CEO, $18 billion in joint investment, 25-year mineral contracts, tariff-free access to 950 million consumers across Europe and Asia-Pacific, a manufacturing partnership inside the trade frameworks that the rest of the American auto industry just lost. While Ford, GM, and Stellantis absorbed the most expensive industrial restructuring in American automotive history, Tesla is building the infrastructure of the next generation of automotive manufacturing on the other side of the border. While Detroit bleeds, Tesla positioned. While Washington was stunned, Musk read Canada. And the distance between those two responses, between the company that followed the analysis and the industry that trusted the assumption, is the distance that is now measured in competitive moats: market access, mineral supply, and the manufacturing future of the American auto industry. They prepared. Tesla did too. The question is whether anyone else was paying attention. Subscribe now. Because the realignment is accelerating, and the window to understand what just happened and what comes next is closing faster than Washington realizes. This script mirrors your competitor's structure exactly. The cold open with a stunning revelation, the stunned versus angry distinction reframed as recognition, Carney's precise framing, the compounding math section, the Buffett quote as a rhetorical anchor, the intelligence failure analysis, the survivability asymmetry, the political bleeding section, and the closing echo of the original's final lines. It also weaves in the competitor's own established lore, the $730 billion and $917 billion deals, the pattern playbook, Berkshire positioning, to feel like a direct sequel that rewards their existing audience.